Hello, horror stories. My name is John, and I want to share an anecdote that I experienced a few years ago. It's truly chilling and has made me reflect during this time on the existence of lost souls that dwell among us, trapped between life and death, and that we can encounter in the darkest corners. In 1998, I moved to the United States after obtaining a university scholarship. I used to visit my parents about every 2 months, traveling in my car as the journey took about 7 hours. It was during one of my first trips back home, on a Sunday. I was still a bit inexperienced with this route, and it always took me a bit more than 7 hours to arrive since I didn't know the way by heart. Plus, back then, there were no cell phones or GPS devices. That night, I got lost. The worst part was that when I realized it, I couldn't turn around, and there was no nearby exit. Upon reading the sign for the next city about 30 kilometers away, I realized I was getting even farther from my final destination. Night was falling rapidly, and by that time I should have been near my city. To make matters worse, I noticed that the gas tank needle was in the red. I began to feel desperate. I was on a dark road with absolutely nothing around. Nerves began to take hold of me. I didn't know what to do if I ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere. Who could help me being so far away and unable to communicate with anyone? I slowed down, and a few kilometers ahead I saw what looked like a gas station. However, suddenly, my car began to slow down gradually. I was running out of gas, and there was still a way to go before reaching the service station. I had no choice but to get out and start walking there, in search of help. Maybe they could give me a gas can to bring back to my car. I gathered my courage and ventured to walk towards the gas station. As I got closer, I realized that the gas station was abandoned. The desolation of the place overwhelmed me, and a feeling of despair grew within me. Curiously, there was no visible light as I had seen minutes before, which added to my growing distress. I sat on a log to ponder what to do next. Suddenly, I noticed small shadows moving inside the gas station. At first, I thought it was an illusion, but the shadows seemed to come to life. Murmurs and children's laughter echoed in the air as if they were playing hide and seek. Fear washed over me, but I knew I couldn't let it paralyze me. With determination, I slowly approached the front door, prepared to face what was hiding within. The place was enveloped in complete darkness, with empty shelves and trash scattered everywhere. It was obviously abandoned, so I was surprised to hear the children playing. I cautiously approached the front door, which was ajar, and took 2 steps inside. With a trembling voice, I asked if anyone was there, but the silence that followed was overwhelming. As I was preparing to leave, I heard a loud noise that I could not identify its origin or direction, but it was clear that it came from inside the gas station. As I turned around, I caught a glimpse of shadows of children sliding through the window, filling me with panic. But in an instant, those shadows disappeared into the darkness, leaving me bewildered and unable to understand what was happening. I stood in shock for a moment, trying to process what I had just witnessed. The atmosphere around the abandoned gas station became even more eerie, as if it was imbued with a supernatural presence. I hurriedly left that place and ran to my car, arriving out of breath and with my vision blurred by the effort. The path was not paved, making running difficult and increasing the risk of tripping. When I arrived, I was drenched in sweat and could barely stand. I got into the car and locked myself in, staying seated not knowing what to do, with trembling hands and my head resting on the steering wheel. Suddenly, the radio turned on at full volume and began changing stations as if someone were manipulating it. I panicked and couldn't turn it off until I finally pulled the stereo and it went silent. That night was turning into a nightmare until, at one point, another car parked next to mine. It was a man and his son from the area who asked if everything was okay. They had seen my car's hazard lights on. They approached to see if I needed help. It was a true miracle. I sighed in relief as they offered me a small gas can to get out of that situation. Additionally, they pointed out where the next gas station was to fill the tank, but assured me that with that small can, I would make it without problems. Noticing my overwhelmed state, they offered to accompany me with their car until I got onto the highway. I thanked them sincerely and headed towards the road. While driving along the highway, the strange apparitions at the abandoned gas station continued to haunt my mind, and the incident with the radio still had me nervous. Finally, I reached the gas station and filled up the fuel tank. I took some coins out of my pocket and headed to the payphone to call my parents. I had no idea how much time had passed, but I knew they would be worried because it was already late, and I hadn't called them from home to let them know I had arrived safely. My mother answered, and I told her everything that had happened, and after listening carefully, she urged me to leave there as soon as possible. When I hung up, I turned around and saw a man staring at me. His face showed no expression other than concern. He approached me and said he had overheard my conversation about what happened at the abandoned gas station. He turned out to be a truck driver who one night decided to park there to rest for a few hours on one of his many trips, but nevertheless, that night he couldn't fall asleep. He heard footsteps and running around his truck in constant whispers. Despite looking out of the truck several times, he did not find or see anyone. The feeling of discomfort grew as the hours passed and he tried to rest, but couldn't, until he finally decided to leave. The next day, when he told his colleagues what had happened, he discovered that he was not the only one who had had a strange experience in that rest area. Some mentioned hearing children's laughter at night, while others spoke of shadows moving among the nearby trees. Intrigued by what he had heard, the truck driver decided to investigate further. He learned that years ago, before the gas station closed, a tragic accident had occurred in the area. A car lost control as it entered the station and hit two brothers who were leaving the store with their parents. The tragedy left an indelible mark on the place. The truck driver also found the two crosses that marked the place where the children lost their lives. They were buried at the side of the station, almost hidden by the undergrowth. Upon hearing this story, the trucker warned passersby to be careful and avoid stopping at the abandoned gas station. But for some, like me, the warning came too late. He asked me if I hadn't seen the two crosses that were buried by the side of the station. I replied that I hadn't, and he warned me to avoid passing by that station from now on, as the souls of those children probably remained there. After hearing the unsettling words of the truck driver, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I quickly said goodbye and hurried back to my car and drove home. With each step towards my vehicle, the feeling of discomfort increased. As I distanced myself, I couldn't shake the stories I had just heard from my mind. Once inside my car, I started the engine and began the journey back home. I decided never to travel that route again, even though years had passed since that night. However, I learned from the radio that they reopened it a few years ago, but just a few weeks later, a mysterious fire, whose cause was never discovered, consumed it entirely. The fire was devastating. The flames roared voraciously, engulfing everything in their path. They quickly spread through the structure of the service station, shrouding the place in an infernal dance of fire and black smoke. Efforts to extinguish the flames were in vain, and it soon became clear that there was nothing left to save. The service station, once a meeting point for weary travelers, was reduced to charred debris twisted by the heat. The silence that followed the fire was unsettling, as if the place itself was mourning for what it had lost. Since then, the route has remained abandoned, a grim reminder of the mysteries and dangers that lurk in the dark and unknown. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.